What's going on, guys, and welcome back to my SmackDown audio review for February 24th, 2023. I am Graham Jason Matthews. Hope you guys are doing well and having a great weekend so far. Of course, we had no SmackDown audio review last week. I was at the show in Montreal, had a great time, but usually we don't do the pay-per-view weekend SmackDown reviews just because I'm usually either there or busy or both. But we will have a SmackDown audio review, we should anyway, every week leading up to WrestleMania. Probably not WrestleMania weekend. I will again be there. Not that the SmackDown before Mania is really of any of note anyway, but just a heads up, a programming note, we should have new SmackDown audio reviews every weekend from this point forward through WrestleMania, aside from WrestleMania weekend itself. As for this show, I thought it was a fine show overall. I think it was more significant for the WrestleMania developments, which is key. That's really what's going to make or break these shows going into WrestleMania. You know, we didn't really have any great matches on the show. We had some decent in-ring action between the opener and Kofi Kingston versus LA Knight. Karrion Kross and Rey Mysterio had a decent match. I think the best part of this show, though, was really the developments heading into WrestleMania. Not only with the Bloodline stuff, which really carries the show week after week. We had another main event segment centered around Sami Zayn and the Usos, Solo Sikoa showing up. No Roman Reigns on the show. But we did find out he will be back on the Blue brand next week to deal with Jey Uso. So I'm really looking forward to that. But in addition to the developments with the Usos and Zayn and very likely building towards that tag team title match at WrestleMania, as they should and as they have for the last 8 or 9 months now, we also got developments with Gunther and McIntyre. No Sheamus in that equation quite yet, but I hope it ends up as a triple threat. That really is the match to do at WrestleMania. Listen, I think Gunther and Drew one-on-one could be amazing, but Sheamus deserves to be in that match at Mania, and that gives me hope why we've been getting Drew and Sheamus as a team lately, is because that's where they're headed with this. But anyway, so we got developments for that. We got developments for Dominik and Rey finally rekindling their rivalry after so many months. Dominik was on the show this week. We had a furthering of the feud between Charlotte Flair and Rhea Ripley heading into WrestleMania for their SmackDown Women's Championship match. So the show wasn't overly exciting or a particularly strong show, but the developments in each of those programs was really what carried the show this week. Primarily the Bloodline stuff per usual. The opening of the episode saw Imperium, Gunther, Ludwig Kaiser, and Giovanni Vinci, all of Imperium, battling and beating the trio of Madcap Moss, Braun Strowman, and Ricochet. 3 men who all have history with Imperium, and specifically Gunther, and losing to him, each of them, individually for the Intercontinental Championship. Moss just vied for the title last week and lost. I wasn't really sure what the point of this match on paper was. It didn't really ultimately serve a purpose aside from giving Imperium a win. I was worried. I'm thinking, well, they got to be doing this match because they're setting up one of these men for another shot at the Intercontinental Championship, maybe at WrestleMania. Thankfully, that was not the case. It was Moss who took the pinfall loss here. No rhyme intended. It was interesting, though, because obviously, like I said, I think I did a SmackDown Lowdown review for last week. Didn't do a SmackDown audio review, as I mentioned, but it was worth noting that I think I don't think it was the SmackDown Lowdown, but it was on one of those .com exclusive videos they put up after SmackDown. Moss and Emma were acting heelish. They were like kind of whiny, and they acted that way too in the pre-match promo before the Intercontinental Championship match last week on the show. So I'm hoping that that's the direction they're headed in with Moss and Emma as well, in turning them heel. We didn't get any development on that here, but that doesn't mean that's not where they're going with it. We could still see that at some point. Time will tell. The match itself was well wrestled, well worked. Ricochet and Strowman work really well as a team. Imperium are great. Moss served his role well. It was what it was. The focus of the match was really on Drew McIntyre coming out in the middle of it, standing on the stage, watching as Imperium, picked up the victory. So afterward, we had the Viking Raiders come out, and I honestly audibly groaned. I like the Viking Raiders. I thought the tag team match that they had with McIntyre and Sheamus last week was great. They got a ton of time, especially down the stretch. It was a really, really, really good match, a hard-hitting affair. But they lost again. They've lost to Drew McIntyre and Sheamus fucking twice now. So I'm not really sure why the feud is still going on. Maybe it's building to a third match, maybe with a stipulation, maybe Gunther cost them the win, McIntyre and Sheamus, that is, and that's how we get the triple threat at Mania. I hope that's the case, because otherwise I'm not really sure what other purpose this served. So they attack Drew, Sheamus makes the save, Strowman and Ricochet make the save, Moss was nowhere to be seen, so clearly we're headed for an 8-man tag team match of sorts. Maybe just Strowman and Ricochet versus the Raiders, but if the Raiders were attacking Sheamus and Drew here, clearly that's where we're headed for another match with them. I'm assuming it's Imperium and then the Raiders versus Sheamus, McIntyre, Strowman, and Ricochet as an 8-man tag, and then maybe a third match between the Raiders and McIntyre and Sheamus. They work well together, but if the Viking Raiders can't beat them when it matters most, or really at all, then what's the point of the feud continuing, aside from just keeping McIntyre and Sheamus busy? So hopefully that's where it's headed, with them beating McIntyre and Sheamus with help from Imperium, and that's what sets up the triple threat for WrestleMania. But this was fine stuff, though. Like I said earlier, I really do hope they incorporate Sheamus into that match. Because as I said before, honestly, if it was going to be a one-on-one match at Mania, I love Drew. I'm not even really sure what else he would do with Drew in this case. But it really should be Gunther and Sheamus one-on-one. I know Drew and Sheamus, or rather Drew and Gunther is the fresh match there. But the story is with Sheamus finally winning the championship, not Drew. Drew's already fucking held the championship like 13 years ago. You know, give him a break. I like Drew a lot. Him being in the mid-card title picture is cool and all, but I think it really should be, I think a triple threat is the way to go, because it gets McIntyre on the card. Him and Sheamus have been teaming anyway. They've always wanted the WrestleMania match. They've had a million matches over the last couple of years, so they don't really need a one-on-one match at Mania, but putting them in a triple threat with the Intercontinental Champion, the undefeated Gunther, I think is the way to go. So that's what I would do anyway. We had LA Knight out next, complaining about how you can't have a WrestleMania in LA without LA Knight. And honestly, he's 100% correct. You can't have a Los Angeles, Inglewood, whatever, WrestleMania without the man named LA Knight. And I know at one point, I don't think he does now, but at one point he lived over on the West Coast. He gives me major West Coast vibes, hearing that fucking swaggy-ass song at WrestleMania as he walks down the stage. You gotta do it. I mean, honestly, more so LA Knight than anyone else on SmackDown, like a Santos or a Karrion, all of whom I like, and they've had some decent months on SmackDown so far. Knight is the one that's really won the people over. Not so much Santos and Karrion Kross so far, but LA Knight. So you gotta have him at WrestleMania. But he was interrupted. I was hoping, okay, I'm thinking in my mind while the segment's going on, what do you even do with LA Knight at WrestleMania? Because, I mean, maybe honestly, like I said, I just said this a moment ago, what do you do with Drew at WrestleMania if he's not facing Gunther or Sheamus? Clearly, that's where they're going with that. They wouldn't have Drew kind of tease something with Gunther if he wasn't going to be involved in the match at Mania. But honestly, like, if you had enough match slots, I mean, they already have a lot of matches planned, expected, confirmed as it is for Mania, so this wouldn't work. But I do like the idea, I love the idea, actually, of a McIntyre-LA Knight feud. Now, I doubt they would acknowledge this, because on paper it sounds like a great feud, but it's even better when you consider, like I said, they would never acknowledge this, that LA Knight and Drew actually have history together. Not in WWE, but, again, from many, many years ago, people probably don't even remember this, but in Impact, actually. Drew had just left WWE, or got fired from WWE in 2014. LA Knight was also fired from WWE in late 2013, I think 2014 as well. So then, I think it might have been early 2015. Either way, I think I remember seeing him at like fucking Arrival or one of those shows when someone won a championship. But he got fired from WWE 2014, 2013. They both made their way to Impact at the exact same time and were involved in the exact same group. Was it The Rising? Was that what it was called? They weren't together for very long. They broke up within like 6 months or so. But like they were touted as like, oh, these ex-WWE stars coming to make an impact. Pun intended, here in Impact. The group sucked. But we actually got a short-lived LA Knight, Drew McIntyre, Drew Galloway, Eli Drake rivalry. And it kind of helped launch the career of Eli Drake as a single star, leading to him becoming a Legends champion in TNA, a tag team champion, a world champion. So you could play off of that history. They would never acknowledge that it happened in Impact. Now, again, it wasn't even that major of a storyline. It wasn't like AJ Styles and Samoa Joe or whatever. But, you know, still, I thought they have history, so it's worth acknowledging. That was so long ago. And I think, you know what, the funny thing is that in that group, The Rising, you know who the third member of that group was? Camacho from WWE. Or I forgot his name in New Japan. He's one half of Guerrillas of Destiny. I know his WWE name, and I don't know his, not Tangaloa, right? It's not Tama Tonga, it's his tag team partner. But yeah, he was the third member in The Rising, so bring him into WWE and tell that story too. But anyway, off my tangent here, they're not doing Drew and LA Knight at WrestleMania. I'm just saying at some point that would be a nice feud. So what do you do with LA Knight at WrestleMania? Because I'm thinking, okay, they already did the Bray Wyatt feud. Honestly, they should have waited till Mania to do that match and not dragged it all out over the course of November, December, January, and waste everyone's time with it when the match wasn't overly... I mean, it wouldn't have been that much better at WrestleMania. But they could have had a stronger feud, more so focused on Knight, and not the, fucking Uncle Howdy shit, which I'll get to in a moment. because I have something to say about Bray Wyatt and that Firefly Fun House crap. But I'm thinking, what else do you do with the guy? He doesn't really have an obvious opponent for WrestleMania, does LA Knight. And they're not doing Money in the Bank at WrestleMania because we still have the pay-per-view in a couple months. So the fuck do you do with the guy? The New Day comes out, Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods. And they talk about how, Kofi had his WrestleMania moment. You got to work for it. He worked for it for 11 years, finally became WWE champion. One of the greatest WrestleMania moments of all time, which is true. I was there. WrestleMania 35, great stuff. So that led to an impromptu match between LA Knight and Kofi Kingston. They had a good match. They were given an ample amount of time, but Kofi Kingston won. Now, I know he won off a distraction from Xavier Woods. I know the New Day don't win a whole lot of singles matches on SmackDown nowadays, but that's the point. They don't need to. They shouldn't. New Day is bulletproof. They just lost the NXT Tag Team titles following a short run in NXT. They are fucking bulletproof. They don't need to win all their matches. They don't really need to win at all, to be honest. They're just so over as it is. They should not be winning. I love Kofi Kingston, but this really is LA Knight's time to shine. This was his first match since losing to Bray Wyatt at Royal Rumble. We haven't even really seen LA Knight on SmackDown at all since that match at the Rumble. He may have had like one or two backstage promos, if that. And if he did, they were either forgettable or just brief. So this was his first time back in the ring, out in front of the crowd. He was still getting a good reaction, was LA Knight, and he lost. And I don't really understand the reason why. Maybe they're building to the New Day versus Knight in a partner. I mean, who would that partner even be? The Miz honestly would make some sense, but he's on Raw. I mean, I guess they could do that. That just seems like a fucking waste of LA Knight. What I was thinking, because I mean, he was talking here about, I want my WrestleMania moment. They do this a lot where, not for a match, not like Cody and Seth style for Mania last year, where he comes out begging for a match and we get a match. I mean, I guess you could get a match, but this is what I was thinking. He comes out every week leading up to WrestleMania, asking for a Mania match or a Mania moment. He doesn't get it. We've seen this story a lot in recent years, but that's what he wants. He shows up at Mania. We don't get an impromptu match, although you could, but he's ultimately interrupted by Stone Cold Steve Austin. I talked to LA Knight a couple of weeks ago, about a month or so ago. He said that's the match that, he would love to see it. Hell yeah, it would be cool. I feel like it'd be fucking awesome to have a back. We probably wouldn't get a back and forth in the mic between the two, but it would be pretty sick, leading to an impromptu brawl. Stone Cold stands tall. I think that'd be an awesome use of LA Knight at WrestleMania. If Stone Cold's not going to wrestle at Mania, having him come out at WrestleMania Hollywood, as he did in 2005 with Roddy Piper for the Piper's Pit segment, I think that'd be awesome. So that's just one idea. I don't know if they'll go in that direction, but it's an idea. We had Charlotte Flair out next to confront Rhea Ripley, although Rhea Ripley did not come out. It was Dominik Mysterio, actually. And they talked about what he learned in prison, and them both being multi-generational talent. Easy for me to say. And then he also mentioned, I'm Rhea's poppy, and he almost went into a comment about how they make sweet love, and he didn't actually finish the sentence, and I thought that was interesting, because they've never actually outright said on the show that they're lovers. I know they've heavily implied it, but they've never actually said anything along those lines. It just sounds like Rhea is toying with Dominik. Rhea has her own lover at home named Buddy Matthews, but he was going into that sentence. Maybe that's what he was going to say or something else. Who knows? Charlotte cut him off and made an Andrade reference, actually, and said, I got my own handsome Latino poppy at home, referencing Andrade. And he sure as hell is at home. He has certainly not been at Dynamite. I don't work at AEW, but I would assume that's where he's been for the last several months. He was suspended and he got hurt. I think he's currently off TV because he's hurt, but I'm honestly starting to think he won't be back at all. Him and Miro both. If they're not doing shit, on TV, they haven't done anything on TV important in a long time, whatever. But I thought this was fine. Rhea did end up coming out. This was advertised as a face-to-face between Rhea and Charlotte. They're clearly saving it. That's what the segment was advertised as. We didn't get it. We technically did get a face-off between the two, for 10 seconds before Rhea, backed out. She got back in the ring, and then Dominik kind of convinced her, told her to leave anyway, convinced her otherwise. It was a good segment. Didn't really make me any more excited for Charlotte and Rhea at WrestleMania than I already was, which I already was a lot. I'm looking forward to the match. WrestleMania main event or not, I do think the tag team title match should go on last. But with the women's match, I don't know. I just think it's a great match, but I think people are more invested in the tag team title stuff with Zayn and Owens and the Usos. So I would go with that, but Charlotte and Rhea is far more enticing on paper to me than fucking Ronda and Charlotte, so I understand why they would put the tag team, or rather that women's match on last this year, especially after the Royal Rumble women's winner was kind of fucked out of the main event last year. Justifiably so. To do it 2 years in a row doesn't send the best message, but we'll see what they have in mind. Shayna Baszler versus Natalya. Shayna did put Natalya on the shelf several months ago with a legitimate injury, I think a broken nose or whatever. Natalya wanted her revenge here, did not get it. I was worried that she might beat Baszler. I'm thinking they had, Natalya's team of her and Shotzi lose to Baszler and Ronda Rousey last week. There's no way she loses 2 weeks in a row, but she did. And I'm glad she did. They need to be building up Baszler specifically and Ronda Rousey. And I still don't know where they're going with this. I don't know if it's a number one contenders match they're having at Mania for the tag titles or a tag team title match itself. I assume we'll find out soon. The match was whatever. This was brief. Shayna went over in clean fashion. That's really all that matters. We had the rematch between Rey Mysterio and Karrion Kross. Now, I mentioned last week in the SmackDown Lowdown, why are we getting a rematch when Rey already beat Karrion clean a month ago in the SmackDown before Royal Rumble? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But we found out here, and as someone left a comment on that video, which I didn't really think about until after the fact, because Dominik said on Raw this week, I'll be at SmackDown with Rhea. And then sure enough, not only was he in several backstage segments in the Charlotte the Charlotte Rhea encounter, he was a big part of that. He also showed up here too. He showed up at ringside, prevented Rey from hitting the 619, attacked Rey at ringside. Referee wasn't looking. Karrion capitalized and picked up the victory. It was a good match while it lasted, but it wasn't really the primary focus. It was all about furthering the feud between Rey and Dominik. The win for Karrion honestly doesn't even really matter because I don't see him having a WrestleMania match either. But why do I keep saying Drew? Rey and Dominik are. That is the WrestleMania match at WrestleMania. Is between those two, father and son. Rey finally giving his son his comeuppance. I mean, Rey doesn't necessarily have to win. I mean, I think Dominik winning would be better on the bigger stage, but it doesn't really matter to me. Rey is obviously so established at this point that he doesn't need the victory, but it would make storyline sense for him to finally beat his son, kick his ass. So it doesn't really matter, but I thought what they did here was well done. Rey came the closest to finally hitting Dominik, because back in the fall when this happened, he would get his ass kicked every fucking week, and Rey did nothing. He would just pout, he would walk away, he was made to look like a shell of his former self. He came close here, and the crowd was ready to pop when he was about to hit Dominik. We didn't get it, though. And it will be a big crowd pop when Rey eventually does hit his son, and then accepts the challenge for a match at WrestleMania. So you know it's coming, and it's coming soon. So I thought this was well done. The main event segment and the entire show, really, as I mentioned, was really built around what Jimmy and Jey would do. Jimmy was going out in the ring, as told by Paul Heyman in the back, call out your brother, and get this shit sorted out. What side of the fence does he fall on currently? So Jimmy talked about Jey in the ring. He called out Jey, got Sami Zayn instead. And Sami tried to convince Jimmy, listen, you were the one that was sold on me from the get-go in the bloodline. It wasn't even Jey, it wasn't Roman, it wasn't Paul, it wasn't Solo, it was you. You were the one that took to me first. You were the one that was behind me from day one. Jimmy kind of teased that he might be buying into what Sami was selling here. Ultimately, he did not, laid him out, and they started brawling. Jey was shown in the crowd walking towards the ring. And the whole question was, whose side is he on? Who's he going to help? Ultimately, he didn't help either of them. They were fighting in the ring. Sami ultimately got the better of the exchange, laid out Jimmy with a haluva kick in the corner, and then he left the ring as Solo Sikoa came out to save Jimmy. But Jey still stood in the corner, in the crowd, doing nothing. And that was the note they kind of left on here, was where does his allegiance lie? And we didn't get any real answers aside from that Jimmy does not like Sami, and he's not on his side, so we know that. That was established. They didn't need to give us any answers here. The Bray Wyatt stuff, I mean, that was really what bothered me. I mentioned earlier, like, the Firefly Fun House shit. I'll mention that quickly here. That was the exact opposite, where we also didn't get a lot of answers, but I just don't give a fuck. Because although it was well-produced, it was intriguing, we've been getting the same cryptic nonsense from Bray for months. And I was the first one to defend it for many, many weeks, saying, listen, they're dragging it out, I'm intrigued. I lost interest a while ago. Probably the last straw for me was the Rumble, when we got no real significance of anything of significance from Bray Wyatt, Alexa Bliss, or whoever. They had a Firefly Funhouse segment here. I've seen Twitter accounts, I think it was Wrestling News Co. actually on Twitter, kind of hinted at the narrator sounding like Eric Young. It actually did, and I was curious if it was. I mean, it sounds like it was kind of his voice modulated a little bit. There was someone's hands playing with one of the dolls. It certainly wasn't Bray. People thought, oh, maybe it's Alexa Bliss, maybe it's Nikki Cross. Either could be a possibility. I'm not exactly sure yet. But listen, if they're leading to a Wyatt 6 faction or something, Uncle Howdy was in this fucking thing, they gotta hurry it the fuck up. Because it's been so many months without him wrestling on SmackDown at all, barely appearing, barely doing anything of note. And just, we're at the point now where no one cares. I certainly don't care. Bray is so over. This is what bothers me. He's just so over, and people love the guy. And he's a great fan favorite right now. But his storylines are terrible, because they're not really leading anywhere. And if the idea is, oh, they're holding out till Mania, then don't fucking bring him back in October. That's what doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you drag this out for 5 months? 5 or 6 months. With the same shit every week. It's well produced, it looks cool, but we're not getting any answers at all. The Bloodline stuff, we're getting gradual developments, and I'm hooked in because it's a great story. The Firefly Fun House crap is the exact opposite. So, with the Usos, Sami, Kevin, the Bloodline, Roman's calling out Jey next week. To find out what's going on with him, that has my attention. I'm looking forward to that. That whole stuff I'm fine with because it's clear that they're telling the story over the course of the road to WrestleMania, and they're not blowing their load on day one, and we're not getting the Usos betraying Sami on day one. Like, the fact how Jey factors into this is key, and they're not giving it away yet. They will in the next couple of weeks, if not at WrestleMania. They will, so I have faith in that. The Bray Wyatt stuff I have lost faith in. Maybe they will, but it's not interesting. The Bloodline stuff is interesting week after week. So that's really what carried the show this week. Not the Firefly Funhouse stuff, but, everything else on the show I thought was fine. The show wasn't great, but that final segment was awesome. I just thought the WrestleMania developments, like I said earlier, were really what was worthwhile about this show. Gunther and Drew, like I said, Rey and Dominik, the Usos and Sami Zayn, all that stuff. Charlotte and Rhea didn't really have much of an interaction. They're probably just saving that for another week. But, all that stuff was really what carried the show for me this week. Primarily the Bloodline stuff. But this show was decent, if only for the WrestleMania developments alone. So those are my thoughts on the February 24th, 2023 edition of Friday Night SmackDown. Thank you guys, as always, for checking out my audio review of the show. I appreciate it. Be sure to like this video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. Have an awesome one, guys. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.